District Governor Deborah Corbett with the Mental Health Initiative. My goal has been to educate our district, broaden our perspective about what falls under the very broad umbrella of mental health. We think of certain things when we think of mental health, like maybe depression or suicide, but there's so much to it. And I reached out to Dr. Bennett because I thought her work sounded really interesting. So she works in the area of stress, which we do think of stress, but she works in the area of distinguishing positive and negative stress. So she is a biobehavioral health expert with an emphasis in interdisciplinary research, especially applying, big word here, psychoneuroimmunological, PNI for short, tools to health processes and outcomes. She has a lab at UNC Charlotte called Stress Waves BRL, and there she examines how our experiences, quote unquote, get under the skin via stress, or how our everyday lives are embodied, ultimately affecting one's health. That means physical and mental. Although chronic stress can be detrimental to the body and mind, acute or manageable stress improves our cognitive, emotional, mental, and physical functioning. So Dr. Bennett comes to us as somebody who manages UNC Charlotte's Department of Psychological Sciences Biobehavioral Core Lab, and she is the Associate Chair for Curriculum there. She completed her master's and PhD in behavioral health at Penn State and completed her postdoctoral fellowship at Ohio State's Institute of Behavioral Medicine. Please welcome Dr. Bennett.
Yes, I was. That's your control. So I do have slides. Let's see if this works. Oh, no, thank you. Great.
Excellent. Yeah, it's perfect.
Oh, yes. Okay. So I have prepared slides, but we can totally go off track. I have these to keep me anyway, because I go on trajectories if I don't have them. So first, thank you for the wonderful introduction and for letting me be here. As I was talking with Romy about this, I have, so if you're not familiar with tenure track, you have to get tenure. That's a super stressful process, and I'm not someone who's able to engage easily with my research with the community, so I haven't been super involved. But now that I've earned tenure and we're now post-pandemic, I'm excited to get engaged with the community to share what we're doing, what I'm doing, what knowledge I have, and then obviously learning from you all too. So I love to teach. So you'll see that probably come out in the way I talk and when I ask questions. I am looking for you to engage with me. So, all right. So what is stress? Just a very basic. When you hear stress, what do you guys think of?
Pressure.
Pressure from where?
Pressure internally, externally.
So usually, right, work related, family, maybe interpersonal stuff, right? Those are obviously major stressors you have to think of. You might have thought of more of the like systemic or societal stressors that are present in our culture and our environment, right? And I know I already mentioned the pandemic, but I think the pandemic brought to light stress for everybody in lots of ways. So whether or not you thought you were stressed before the pandemic, you probably are like, I am stressed now, right? So I want to talk about what is that stress response that you're having. And I want to anchor us into a definition because stress, as you guys have thought about already, has lots of different meanings, definitions, perspectives. So the way I come at it is stress is really a biobehavioral response in our bodies that is allowing us to be successful in our environment. So whatever's coming at us, we're bringing that information into our brain, we're thinking about what we need to do to react to it, and that might recall as this kind of biological change that happens. So this process is very ingrained in our kind of evolutionary history as a species. If you want to think about us as we've changed our environment, but our way we respond to stressors, regardless of this quality or the type of stressor, we still have this very similar basic biological response. So if we detect stress, there's this withdrawal of one of our nervous systems, the parasympathetic. That is one that helps us when we're at rest, to be calm. It helps us digest food, it helps us be aware and kind of relaxed. So that will withdraw when we decide we're stressed. And then the sympathetic nervous system comes on and is super fast. So that's if you've ever been in a situation where you almost had a car accident, you avoided it, and maybe you felt a rush of energy, that's that sympathetic nervous system, right? So anytime you have that kind of rush of energy, you might want to think about it that way. It's preparing you, right? It's helping you take in all the information, be ready to act quickly. So super valuable and important for us in our survival. So if that stress response actually takes care of the stressor, then that's it. You move on with your day. It was a short, quick arousal, no big deal, we move on. But if that stressor was more potent, it actually leads to activation of another stress axis, which is multiple stages. It takes a little bit longer to see, but its end product is cortisol. So you may have heard that word. That seems to be a hot word these days. Cortisol, stress hormone. You have too much cortisol, too little cortisol. Like there's a lot that goes into it, right? But in a really well response or regulated response, you're going to release the cortisol. It will help you deal with that stressor that's a little bit maybe longer lasting. Let's say a presentation that you're giving, or dealing with maybe a boss or somebody or a partner that's driving you up the wall. Like there's things right there that you could be needing a little bit more cortisol, a little bit more response for. So that cortisol will kick in. All very normal, adaptive, awesome, right? That's the piece that we like. This then has cascading effects throughout the body, but with my expertise, I'm super interested in the immune system, right? Because the immune system's job is to improve our ability to survive, right? It takes care of bacteria, viruses, things that shouldn't be there. It helps heal our body from the wear and tear of every day. So just walking around and being physically active in that very maybe not super rigorous way, that causes wear and tear. And then when we sleep, our bodies need to repair that. And that happens by the immune system, right? So these hormones that the stress responses create can alter the way that immune system works. So we can get more into that, but I don't want us to get into the nitty-gritty because I think there are other pieces that I want to get to. So the immune system then also does feedback to the brain and can change our behavior. And I think that's an important piece that maybe you maybe kind of understand. So let's think about when you're sick. Are you like outgoing and energetic?
Mm.
No, right? You're tired. You don't want to be around people. You're irritable. People don't want to be around you, right? For lots of reasons, but you're likely irritable and tired, right? So that's really the immune system kicking in. It's telling you, hey, you need to change your behavior. You need to rest. You need to isolate yourself. The virus doesn't want you to isolate yourself, but for everyone else's health, you should, right? So when I work, obviously I teach young adults in college, and most of them don't pay attention to me when I say that. It's like, don't come to class if you're feeling sick. I don't want whatever you have being released in this environment, because I will probably get exposed to it and get sick. So when a well-regulated body happens, you have these effects on the immune system, which then can, so this stimulatory effect, so the solid line is a stimulation effect. So when you initially have a stress response, the body actually, the immune system actually gets more primed and ready to have a response, which makes sense. If you get injured in your whatever event you're dealing with, you want your immune system primed and ready to take care of whatever just happened to you. But you don't want it stuck in that state. So that's where cortisol comes through. These dashed lines mean that it comes through and will actually calm the immune system back down, right? So if it didn't get triggered, if it's not trying to heal you, or you didn't get infected with anything, you want it to shut down because you don't want to just roguely going around your body attacking things, right? Because then that causes things like autoimmune conditions or things that are outside of its job. It's not supposed to attack self. So in a well-regulated body, the parasympathetic system will come back on, and that actually causes a turning down of the immune system. So this is a well, happy, regulated body. This also is important because stress, as many of you in this room probably know, stress is important to life. When we mentioned that stress is key, right? We have to have stress in our lives so that we can perform well. If our stress levels are low, we don't perform at our top optimal. And if they're too high, we also don't perform at our optimal levels. And then you probably have seen this throughout your lives at different times. You start doing things, you get engaged with activities, and then all of a sudden you're like, what am I doing? I have no time for me to even sleep. Or I don't have time to care for the people that are important to me. So you realize, okay, maybe I've gotten too high in the things that I'm doing. So I need to start letting some of those activities go so I get back more into that sweet spot. College students, again, always ask me, and you guys might be wondering, like, how do you know what that sweet spot is? It's trial and error, right? If you don't do enough and you're like, no, you're not performing at whatever level you were happy with, pick up something else. What does that look like? It could be engagement with service activities. It could be engagement with different groups. Like, it's really cool, this camaraderie that was here. I love this. This is part of this is amazing. We'll talk about this being a really great potential stress management tool or coping skill. So again, stress is unfortunately necessary for us to thrive and do our best. We also need stress so that we can develop resilience. So if you know any young children, they usually aren't resilient in the ways that if a problem that an adult has would be, affecting a child, their resilience is likely not built up very well. So what we recognize is that and we see it, I use children as an example because you can see children who have been maybe protected or sheltered from stressors, that they don't have the ability to handle it when they're in school maybe and having stress in those environments. And then they continue because they haven't had the experience of dealing with that stressor, learning they can master or get through it and then be successful. So one of the things about resilience is there's lots of definitions, so it depends on who you talk with. I'm going to talk about it in a very general way, but it did start in the developmental psychology field, which is studying with children and recognizing that there are kids who are in very adverse events, in very adverse environments, who are still able to be successful adults, right? So there's something about resilience that is present, right? And today I'll tell you, learn that if children don't have stressors, then they don't learn how to be resilient, which is actually harmful for them as well. So what does resilience require? It requires a stressor. It requires some type of adversity, some type of event that challenges their status quo, so that they can learn, they can overcome, and they develop that skill set so that they can learn how to develop that, have that kind of ownership and knowledge that they're successful in getting through things. So in general, the research suggests that 70% of the population is resilient. So resilience is normal, right? You think about it. We are here because our ancestors were resilient in their environment, right? And then our future generations are going to be present because we were resilient. So resilience is very much a common human experience. So when we see things where we don't see resilience, that is not the majority. And it also, we can start unpacking some of those potential factors. But first I want to just show you, it's kind of hard to see from a distance, but I just want to kind of get you that there's more than one type of resilience. So this is on this is just time going on here. This is looking at health from being well-regulated and healthy to dysfunctional, thinking about maybe chronic diseases as a way to think about that, whether it's physical or mental. And then when you have this acute potential traumatic event, that's what that stands for, PTEs, potential traumatic event, there are lots of ways in which bodies can respond. Right? So some people may have just a little like, oh, that was not cool. I didn't deal well with that situation, but then they go right back to functioning normally. So we call those people who are minimally impacted by the stressor. So they have a really quick stress response or resilience response. Then there are others who, when that response or when that event happens, their functioning dramatically changes. They don't actually adapt well to whatever that new context is. So if we want to think about the pandemic, right, we can probably start seeing people who were able to just like, well, whatever, people who work from home, now they still have to stay working from home, what do you do? Like their life didn't change very much, maybe, though they now have more people in their house that they have to deal with, right? In their work environment, and they're like, wait, you're not supposed to be here. Then there's those other people who are like, I worked outside of my office or outside of my home, and now I have to work in my home, and they didn't handle that well, right? Because now they might have no one living with them, so now they really don't see anybody at all, right? These responses are very different. So high dysfunction, and then they recover. So that's initial dysfunction with recovery, and then we have people who have that initial dysfunction and never recover for whatever reason, right? And we'll talk a little bit about what those factors are. Then we also have people who have a minimal response initially, but then they never go back. They end up starting to slowly have dysfunction that shows up. So it's like they just dealt with, maybe they distracted or avoided whatever just happened, and it kind of builds up over time, and now it starts really altering the way they interact with the world, whether they're exercising, whether they're taking care of themselves, and eventually it will lead to some type of dysfunction. So those are the kind of the four in response to this, that we're starting off as healthy individuals, and then how their health might be affected or resilience might play out. Then there are individuals who are already chronically stressed or have high adversity just in their normal everyday life because of their circumstances. So they obviously experience these traumatic events as well, and they can either continue to stay in their chronic dysfunction state, or they could actually maybe at some point develop emergent resilience. And that's the idea that in a body that shouldn't be able to develop or be able to be flexible because it's chronically distressed, that there's this kind of, all of a sudden there's almost this healing that goes on. And goes forward. Maybe they got therapy, maybe they found meaning in life in some way. But those are the kinds of different ways that we can see that. So what factors influence resilience? So past experiences are huge. This is one of the reasons why people who are older are usually happier and more resilient, because they have more life to pull on and realize that, wait, you know what, the things I worried about when I was 30 and 40, not a big deal anymore. Or when I worried about them when I was 12 or whatever, like not a big deal, because life continues and you have more resources. Also one of those factors, right? So whether or not you develop better stress management tools, you may also have more financial resources, you may be better connected, more social capital, all those kind of things that help deal with stress when it comes at you. Then the physiological functioning, which I talked about earlier, right, where you have the health of the individual plays a major role of whether or not they're fully functioning well and their body can be adaptive to the situation that's going on, as well as environment and context, right? So this group, you guys created a space of social connection, which is so important for us as humans. We are very social beings. This is another reason why this pandemic was so stressful for lots of people. It forced isolation. And sometimes that was complete isolation depending on your living arrangements and that kind of stuff. So we are very social creatures. We need each other. So I want to stop there before I get into chronic stress and just see what kind of questions or thoughts or what are you guys thinking right now?
That's more of a comment, I guess. One thing that I was interested to learn about resilience and ACE scores, et cetera, is that the correlation, supposedly, that there is between having a little bit of a higher ACE score in your history and having strong resilience actually can make you a better leader. And that was really interesting on that aspect of it, where you find that to be true, because you respond more calmly, well, in emergencies, and you get like resilience and all that. Is that?
Yeah, so very true pattern that we see in the data. So this is where if you don't have any resilience, you end up don't have any adversity, you don't have the ability to develop resilience, right? And we need people who know how to be resilient. One of the interesting things, so I don't study ACEs, so ACEs are adverse childhood experiences, which almost everyone has. The literature, when that first started coming out, people were shocked that people had so many of them. But if you think about childhood and being parents, if you've lived, well, we all lived through childhood. I don't know if you lived as parents, but like that, think about the the experience of not having people doing something that they were really trained to do, right? Like, we don't train people to be parents. It's all about learning and vicariously living and trial and like I joked with I'm a science, right? I'm a experimental science person. I'm like, this is all trial and error. So you tell us what's working, what's not working, hopefully, and you won't find out either until you're like 20 if you did a good job, right? Maybe 30, I don't know, right? So that's like the parenting is one of those weird things. So ACEs are really common. And one of the things that we're starting to see so this idea about leaders who've had ACEs, who've been resilient. I don't know it specifically, but it would not surprise me that that's present. I can tell you that there's been some work showing that the environment in which the child's in and the experience adversity greatly affects how that then ends up harming or changing their trajectory as an adult. So if you have ACEs in your environment that can't help you process those and work through them, you end up having a lot of negative health behaviors, negative health outcomes, right? So maybe you use alcohol or drugs or things to escape as opposed to taking on stressors head on and feeling like you have control and that kind of stuff. So that is 100% true, because environments where children have these, but whatever the environment was able to help them through it, they've learned they can do it, and then their stress as adults, their trajectory is better. You could also make.
Yeah, I have a kind of comment / question. As you were talking, it occurs to me that, so I'm a practicing psychologist, so I'm not in research. And I've been in practice for 18, 19 years. And I think I'm noticing, so I work with adults, but with communication and conflict and relationships. So family things come up and parenting things come up too. And I think I'm noticing changes in parenting styles across these 19 years. And specifically, I think I'm noticing that, again, I don't have, data like you have, but I think I'm noticing that parents are protecting their kids more from stress earlier on, so then they can get to a crunch where suddenly they realize that they've protected them too much. So that kids who are, I'm gonna say now, teenagers, are different from the kids who came before them simply as a result of parenting practices. Is there data to show that?
I don't know. But only anecdotally I can talk about it, because so your practice and your experience with individuals, I think, is much better probably knowledge based than what I'm gonna talk about, because it's not my specific area. But I have a 21-year-old, and he hated my husband and I, right? Because most high school students at some point have butting of heads with their parents, right? So he was a pandemic kid, he was a junior when the pandemic hit, so his senior year was all Reddit, whatever. So he left because he was stuck, forced at home, right? So he left, went to college, and usually, and then you can maybe speak to this a little bit more, but usually people don't recognize that their parents weren't so bad until they're in like mid-20s or maybe starting their own family. He came back for that winter break, so he left in August, came back in December, and he was like, oh my God, you guys are not that bad. Holy cow, like the parents, he's like, my friends have to like check in every day with their parents. And I'm like, why? He's like, because they're scared. And I was like, so I do think there's something about fear and anxiety that is kind of rampant in our society. And I think parents are not managing it well, and then that's being passed to the children, and then the children are also. Because I will tell you, college students today are the most stressed, depressed, anxious as they've ever been, and that trend started about 2007 and has been increasing ever since then. So this is pre-pandemic that this was happening. So I think there's something culturally that we are not doing well, or that we're reinforcing that stress, that anxiety about this is okay.
iPhones came out now, 06, 07.
Yep.
Just saying.
Social media is a problem.
Smartphones, same thing.
My question is for the older children, like in their 70s. as you age, do your stressors change focus?
So I think you're hitting something really key. So my parents are in their 80s, and I talk a lot about this with them. And my parents don't let me off the hook. So about 12 years ago, they came to visit me, and I was just like, "You guys are so functional." My parents, right? Can you imagine your child telling you how functional you are? So anyways, they don't let me live that down. But anyways,
They're
so I
just
can.
happy they don't have to take care of me.
So my parents, right, they're in their 80s now, and so they were in their 70s when I made the comment to them. And so I think what happens as we age is, so one, the perspective you have on life, you have so much more experience to recognize what stressors may or may not be important, right? So a stressor can be any event that, like at this stage in your life, you may have an event happen. You might have a 20-year-old standing next to you. You both see the same exact event, and you're like, well, whatever, that's gonna move on, and things will be carrying on. This person might be freaking out because they have no idea that this isn't the end of whatever life they think they're living. So yes, I think the stressor focus changes because your knowledge is different.
The reason I ask that is because my next to last day of skiing this year, I had the opportunity to be with a 20-something, and they were chatting. And when we got to the top of the hill, my stressor is, don't let me fall so I break something, because when I break it, it ain't coming back. This kid's attitude was, I hope everybody thinks that I'm the coolest thing on the slope. And they're worried about what other people think about it, and I'm worried about my health. And we were both freaked.
Right.
Both freaked about it.
Freaked
And I thought about it, when I was his age, yeah. I came off that lift on one ski, still adjusting my helmet, my poles, and I wasn't even shooshing. I was heading down that hill. Because I wanted to be the coolest thing.
Right. So focus does change, right? I'm gonna make an assumption that this young person may or may not have been married yet, so they're still trying to
no, they were an app student.
Okay, they were trying to prove their worthiness, right, to the world, but also maybe to a future mate, not you, but like thinking bigger, right? But you're right, health is really, I'd say, now that I'm in my 40s, I've recognized that 40 was a tipping point. You're probably like, well, so is 50 and 60. Right. But like for health things, that was like a big tipping point, right? And everyone starts complaining, oh, my body starts hurting more. And we're like, oh, you must be 40 or older, right? Like that's the running joke, but that is true. Our bodies do. We've been using them. We may have taken good care of them. We may not have been taking good care of them, and they start to slow down. So the stress response that we have is altered as we age. If you become less flexible. And we also don't heal as quickly. So like you said, if you fall now at this age and hurt yourself, your recovery time, if you do, is so much longer than a 20-year-old. So they can they can abuse their body that way, right? It's not until you start to lose it, do you recognize that maybe I should stop.
I was also gonna say our focus changes because we've got more time behind us and we've got less time to get things done ahead of us.
There is like the finite of our mortality, right? You don't see that as a 20-something with the prefrontal cortex that still is like, let me just run around and do anything crazy. I'll jump out of buildings, or there's no governance because life hasn't taught them all the governance that maybe they need, right? So as we age, we've learned a lot. We're students of life, we're products of life.
I think the stressors that move from when you're 20 to when you're 70 or what have you, your children are grown. You can admire your grandchildren and send them back. Your career has flourished or not flourished, but it's over. And all of those stressors have been removed from your life. So Actually, pretty neat.
It can be, right? And then, but there are other stressors that can develop as you age, right? So one of the things that happens is at some point, it sounds like Daryl and his wife is going through something really stressful with their health. You start your network, you start seeing more death, right? You don't usually see death a lot as a younger person. So then you have to be, keeping involved in groups like this are really good because your network continues to grow, right? And you continue to keep that social connection, which is really important. This is where also caregiving for your spouse can be very difficult as you age because it also becomes isolating because you have to spend a lot of time caring for them. So if you have any friends that are caregivers, figure out how to connect with them. Even though they may seem stressed, for you to come in and hang out with them in their house, make that effort because they also need the social connection to help buffer the stress that they are experiencing. So it shifts. Life is stressful. It just shifts where it is, where the source of it is. Does that make sense? I think that's my probably biggest takeaway today for you. I know, how much more time do I have?
Plenty, it's only 12:32, so.
Oh, okay, well then I will, so I think I lost you guys in my biology piece, which I totally get because it's kind of why do I care about it? I get it. So I am not at all bothered by that one bit. So what I want to do though is talk quickly about some things that we can see about this transition from a healthy, regulated stress to the chronic stress. That is really the detrimental type that when you read articles about stress, you're likely hearing them talk about chronic stress. And all of us have been gone through the pandemic, probably can identify periods of time, maybe you still are in a state of chronic stress, but you may be able to look back and see periods of time where you're oh, I definitely was chronically stressed. So I just want to talk about that real quick. So some of this work started by a researcher out in California who is very interested in how is our body, so how is this then changing the way we function normally? Because we can see that chronic stress is linked to cardiovascular disease, hypertension, type 2 diabetes. It's linked to things like recurrence and quality of life following cancer diagnosis. We can see it involved in kind of all these different aspects of life. So if you have chronic stress, you can see these changes in the body. So there's work that shows that these stressors, right, these social processes, whatever those are, adversity, trauma, will change the way the body functions, and then it actually changes the way our immune cells function by changing their DNA, their expression. So it's actually getting into that real cellular level of how our cells are functioning. So I think that's a really important thing. It's not just this idea it's in our head, it literally is getting involved in changing the way our cells function. So this is another diagram that we talked about healthy regulation, where you've got the stress response, and then when you have the stressor done, if you're regulated, your parasympathetic will come back on and cool down the immune system, and then your cortisol, when it's done being used, will also then calm the immune system down. Those two pathways are our greatest ways to calm down the immune system. So what we find is happening when people go into this chronic stress state, that parasympathetic doesn't come back on. They stay in this hypervigilant sympathetic, where they're always looking for the next thing that's going to come at them. If you know anybody with PTSD, hypervigilance is one of the major symptoms associated with that. That is a very common kind of state of anybody who's in a chronic stress state. And then at some point, the immune cells stop being sensitive to cortisol. And I say sometime because we haven't been able to identify when or why that happens. But the immune cells will actually remove the receptors for cortisol so that they don't have to be controlled by it anymore and they can still function and do their job. So it's actually an adaptive response to having too much cortisol in your body and the immune system still needing to do its job. But now the immune system can't be regulated because both your parasympathetic isn't active and your cortisol is gone. So the immune cells can kind of be rampant, and that's what this if you hear also in the news, one second, when you hear also in the news about chronic stress, high cortisol, high inflammation, this is that connection that they're talking about, is that there's this change in the way the immune system is actually being controlled by other hormones.
So like an anti-anxiety pill or anti-depression pill, where would that fit in with fixing that? Or does it just kind of have the same effect like people that take alcohol when they're, or drugs when they're stressed out? Like how does that, is it just kind of mask it more like alcohol would, or is it more like it fixes those things?
So it depends on the drug that someone might be taking for let's go with antidepressants. Let's run with selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. That's a common, so Prozac, common antidepressant that is given. And for a long time, the assumption is that it's actually increasing serotonin in the brain by getting into the brain and altering the synapses, the way they function. That is only based on data from a test tube where they were able to see changes in cells in a test tube. So researchers have continued doing research about how is this actually changing. So one of the largest reservoirs of serotonin is our gut. It's in our lower GI tract, so in our small intestine, large intestine. I think this is the place that we are going to start learning so much more about how our world and how we really bring it in is going to be through our gut. So some people call it the second brain because it has, I'm serious, it's the second brain, right? It has serotonin, it has 95% of our serotonin, it has 50% of our dopamine. It sends the messaging from our brain to our gut. It is 90% from our gut to our brain and 10% from our brain to our gut. So they're starting to think that these serotonin reuptake inhibitors are actually altering serotonin here, which is then causing benefits up here and regulating those synapses inside the brain. So that's one pathway. There also is, they've seen changes in the stress response, the HPA axis. They've seen that be better regulated when somebody who has major depression takes an SSRI versus not. So it's somehow altering the serotonin presence in the brain, which then alters their perceptions with it. Does that make sense? So
Does it stop their ability to be able to build resilience though? Like when people do medicate like their teenager or something like that, rather than having them push through it, like does it kind of create that?
we don't have data for that,
Yeah,
that I'm aware of. I don't know it off the top of my head. There may be somebody starting to do some work in that area, but at this point, most of ours is really just looking at those kind of immediate effects as opposed to those long-term effects. So there's probably data somewhere that we could answer that question with. Like, did you take some type of antidepressant or any anxiolytic as a high school person?
Nikki, can I ask a
How are you
question?
behaving today? You might be able to get at something like that.
Will those receptors come back?
They will. They can. So for a long time, when we first started learning about this, everyone was like, oh my gosh, you lose this ability. And these were not tried and true biologists. So I'm in a really interdisciplinary field. And I was like, wait, what are you talking about? Our bodies are so flexible that we can, so if you can alter your stress responses, you can modify your cortisol, your immune cells can develop sensitivity again and will start producing the receptors for it. Things like exercise, sleep, things that you all probably are like, oh yeah, I know I should be doing these things. We should be, because they work. It's just how do we help humans do them when they have all these other pressures in their heads?
What type of sleep is
JJ.
best? Deep? Because they have the deep, the REM, the whatever's. And now with these things, they tell you how
All the
messed up
info.
you are every day.
Yes. So all of it.
All of it.
Each shortcut. Each phase of sleep has its benefits. So the deep sleep, where your slow wave sleep, that's important for certain memory formations, and that's really involved when our body's healing. So like thinking about the wear and tear of the day, muscle repair, organ repair, those kind of things. But REM sleep, which is it's kind of where your brain's even more active, just as active as it is during the day. That's important for full memory consolidation and keeping things and being able to connect things from past experiences. So all of it.
JJ, can I ask?
Oh, wow.
So that means you need to get, so in sleep usually is a 90-minute increments usually, a cycle. So you need ideally at least 6 of those so you can get to REM. So REM happens more longer in your sleep cycle. So initial sleep is more about restoring the body. And then it starts to shift into the more of the restoring the memories and preserving the learning that went on that day. This is why like pulling elevators, I tell some college students all the time, pulling elevators is so stupid because whatever you just learned is gonna not be saved. So if you're doing anything that you have to save a lot of energy or knowledge about, like definitely sleep the night before. I know it's hard sometimes because you're anxious, but is Jenny have a question? So all right, hey, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Not really. Is there volume?
Maybe she can put it on the chat.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You were talking about serotonin in the gut. Is that why some people like me overeat? Because they're trying to get that serotonin and you're eating stuff to up the serotonin?
So that's a really complex question. So one of the things with, so it sounds like you might be talking about maybe emotional eating or eating when you're stressed.
Yes.
So that is a very common tool that we use because when we eat foods that we like, dopamine is released in our brain and that creates a positive reward and that makes us feel better and it reduces the stress we're feeling. So if you notice, like comfort foods are never like carrots and broccoli, right? Because those don't have the same positive reward in our brain that ice cream, fried chicken, fried anything, right? Those things, when you eat them, you just all of a sudden are like on cloud 9, right? Because you're eating something that makes you feel better. And that's why lots of people have just eat foods that they know they may or may not, we know we shouldn't, but we do anyways, right? So alcohol works similarly, right? And one of the things I think, so you feel the benefit, not only in your brain, you may not feel it in your brain, but you feel it in your body. You probably immediately relax and feel better with your comfort foods. Same thing with alcohol, like, right? If you are a stressed, tense person, as soon as you take that drink of alcohol, it's gonna cause it calms the brain. It's a depressant on the brain, so it calms everything down. So it's one of the reasons why I think in our culture, there's a lot of alcohol overuse or potentially what we call functional alcoholism, where people are able to still do everything they need to, but still drink more than their body should for the long haul. So did that help, Jenny? Okay, cool.
I have one, I feel the weather, being out in the sun is such an important thing, it just changes your mood. And even if you're stressed, if you're out there and just taking in the sun, and I wonder if that's at a cellular level, when you're getting energy from the sun rays, which we all need, is actually changing the way we act and behave and our stress levels come down. And if that's something people should do every morning, because sometimes you're just sitting inside and you don't go out and you don't take the sun in and you can just wallow in your own stress, really.
Yes, 100%. I am nature's my therapy. So I'm totally bought in. There's literature that would support that. I have a TA, who's a teaching assistant, who's like, some of these students just need to like take their shoes off and go step in grass because like they're just so disconnected and not grounded, right? So nature, a lot of that, what it does, it helps us ground us back into our more basic nature of being an animal, which is what we are. A lot of people don't think about it that way. And that's why being outdoors is so beneficial because it's actually getting us back into the environment that we evolved from. All of this that we've built is not normal in that biological way. Does that make sense? So I think that's why being outdoors is so rewarding. Sun also super beneficial because it helps increase vitamin D, and that's an important thing to help regulate us.
Where are we with time?
I think we're good, I mean, if you're
Okay.
done.
We can stop.
Would you be able
Okay.
to answer a few questions if people have them afterwards?
Yes, I can stay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you all.
Thank you.
International.